Louisiana is performing a geological vanishing act, a desperate, multi-billion-dollar effort to stop an entire state from being scrubbed off the map of America. Right now, its coastline is unraveling. An area of land the size of an American football field disappears every 100 minutes, and during a hurricane, that rate accelerates to a football field every few minutes. By July 2025, the state's single biggest hope, a nearly $3 billion megaproject designed to save it, was dead. Not delayed, not paused. Terminated after hundreds of millions of dollars were already spent, before it could ever save a single inch of land. So the real question is, how do you save a place that is actively erasing itself? When the largest environmental restoration project in American history has already been declared a failure, Louisiana was never meant to be permanent. Not like this. The entire southern half of the state is a geological gift from the Mississippi River. For 7,000 years, the river snaked across the landscape, flooding its banks each spring, depositing billions of tons of rich sediment, and building one of the world's great deltas, a sprawling, marshy, life-giving coastline. That process, that constant addition of new land, is the only reason Louisiana exists. The state's very foundation is built on the idea of a river allowed to be wild, and in 1927, we tamed it. The Great Mississippi River flood was a catastrophe of biblical proportions. The river broke free, submerging 27,000 square miles of land, displacing nearly 1 million people and rewriting the political and social geography of the nation. The public demanded action. The government delivered. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was tasked with an unprecedented mission to chain the Mississippi, to ensure it would never again threaten the cities and farms along its banks. They built the largest system of levees and floodwalls the world had ever seen, a monumental feat of engineering that has, for nearly a century, protected millions of people. And in doing so, it signed a geological death sentence for the Louisiana coast. The levees worked. They worked perfectly. But they treated the river's life-giving sediment like a toxin. They channeled that land-building material into a straight, deep flume, shooting it uselessly off the continental shelf and into the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The delta, cut off from its only source of nourishment, began to starve. The very engine of its creation had been turned off. A process that had built a coastline for millennia was not just halted, it was reversed. That was only the first cut. Then came the second. The discovery of oil and gas beneath the marshlands triggered a new kind of surgical dissection. Over the next several decades, energy companies dredged thousands of miles of canals for pipelines and navigation. Straight lines cut through the curving, organic tapestry of the wetlands. Each canal was an open wound. It allowed highly corrosive saltwater from the Gulf to penetrate deep into freshwater marsh ecosystems, killing the root systems of the plants that held the fragile soil together. The land, already starving for sediment from the river, was now being poisoned from below by salt. The roots died, the soil dissolved, and solid marsh disintegrated into open water. And beneath it all, a silent, invisible force was pulling the entire landscape downward. Subsidence, the natural soils of a river delta, are soft, organic, and full of water. Over time, they compact under their own immense weight and sink. This process is relentless. But for thousands of years, it was balanced by the annual deposit of new sediment from the river's floods. The land sank, but the river built it back up. After 1927, the building stopped. But the sinking did not. Today, the Louisiana coast is sinking at an average rate of 9 millimeters every single year. That's more than a third of an inch. It doesn't sound like much, the thickness of a smartphone, but it's happening relentlessly across thousands of square miles. It's a slow-motion collapse. This effect is then compounded by global sea level rise, creating an extreme local effect called relative sea level rise. The water is rising from above while the land is collapsing from below. A two-front war against a place that has already had its supply lines cut. Since 1932, Louisiana has lost over 2,000 square miles of its coast. An area roughly the size of the entire state of Delaware has vanished. Gone, wiped off the map, not theoretically, not in a computer model, In reality, imagine an invisible hand slowly erasing Delaware from the eastern seaboard. That is what has happened to Louisiana. And it's still happening right now. The scale of the crisis demanded a response of equal scale. The money for that response came from a source of profound irony. In April 2010, the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill became the worst offshore environmental disaster in American history. A surge of black crude oil fouled hundreds of miles of Louisiana's already dying coastline, accelerating marsh erosion and poisoning wildlife. But the multi-billion-dollar legal settlements that followed the disaster handed the state of Louisiana a war chest. Billions of dollars in fines paid by an oil company would now fund the desperate effort to save a coast ravaged by both the side effects of oil extraction and the levees that protected oil infrastructure. The state created a single entity to wield this new weapon, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, or CPRAW. Its mission was to draft and execute a comprehensive coastal master plan, a 50-year, $50 billion blueprint for survival. The plan was a portfolio of projects: barrier island restoration, oyster reef creation, shoreline protection. But at its heart was one single, audacious, almost mythical project. It was called the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion. It was, by every measure, the single largest and most ambitious environmental restoration project in the history of the United States. The concept was as simple as it was bold. If the levees are the problem, then the solution must be to punch a hole in them. Not to tear them down entirely, that would be suicidal, but to build a controlled gate. A massive structure that could be opened periodically to allow the sediment-rich water of the Mississippi River to flow back into the starving wetlands of the Barataria Basin, one of the most rapidly eroding estuaries on the entire planet. The diversion would mimic nature's original design. It would let the river do what it was born to do: build land. The engineering was monumental. It would divert a massive volume of water and sediment through a concrete channel, spreading it across the basin to begin the slow, methodical work of rebuilding thousands of acres of marsh. The project was hailed as the crown jewel of the master plan. The great hope, the one project with the sheer scale to actually turn the tide, not just slow the bleeding. For years, it was debated, modeled, and litigated. Its environmental impact statements ran thousands of pages. Finally, in August 2023, after decades of planning, ground was broken. The largest ecological rescue mission America had ever seen was finally underway. The final cost was projected to be somewhere between $2.5 and $3 billion. A staggering price tag. But the cost of doing nothing, the complete collapse of the Barataria Basin, leaving New Orleans and the surrounding parishes exposed to the full fury of the open Gulf, was infinitely higher. For a moment, it felt like survival was possible. Engineering was coming to the rescue. The state had a plan, and the work had begun. The hope did not last long. The problem with a solution this massive is that it creates its own massive side effects, and the side effects of the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion were not theoretical. They were existential for the people who lived and worked in the basin. For decades, as the coast eroded, the freshwater marshes of Barataria slowly transformed into a saltwater estuary. The ecosystem changed, and a new, multi-generational, multi-million-dollar economy grew in its place. Oystermen, shrimpers, and commercial fishermen built their lives on the salty water that was, ironically, a symptom of the land's slow death. That saltwater environment created some of the most productive oyster grounds and shrimp fisheries in the entire country. The sediment diversion, by its very design, threatened to destroy all of it. Reintroducing a massive volume of freshwater from the Mississippi River would fundamentally alter the basin's salinity. It would kill the oyster reefs that required a specific balance of salt to survive. It would push the shrimp populations further out into the Gulf, outside the reach of local fishermen. It would also introduce whatever pollutants and agricultural runoff the Mississippi River carried with it from half a continent, potentially creating toxic sediment buildups and worsening the Gulf's dead zone through hypoxia. Even the drinking water for some communities was at risk. The project had created an impossible choice: save the land by destroying the livelihoods of the people who live on it, or protect the current economy by allowing the land it depends on to continue washing into the sea. This was not a simple fight between environmentalists and industry. It was a fight between two entirely different visions of survival. The fishermen and oystermen weren't against saving the coast. They just didn't want the solution to be the thing that bankrupted them. Their argument was powerful. We have adapted to this broken environment. We have built our lives here. You cannot save the land by sacrificing its people. The political winds shifted with lethal speed. In January 2024, a new governor, Jeff Landry, took office. He had been a vocal opponent of the sediment diversion, and he brought that opposition with him to the governor's mansion. He argued the project was a fiscal and ecological disaster in the making. In a statement in April 2025, he was blunt, claiming the Mid-Barataria project would cost taxpayers over $50 million a year in dredging. Increase the hypoxia, destroying our fishing around our great jewel of Grand Isle, and impact the drinking water. He appointed new leadership to the CPRA, including Gordon Gordy Dove as chairman, who shared his skepticism. The state government that had championed the project for over a decade was now actively working against it. The decisive blow came on April 26, 2025, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the very agency that built the levees in the first place, suspended the project's critical Clean Water Act permit, citing the need for further review. The project screeched to a halt. The legal and political opposition had become overwhelming. Less than 3 months later, on July 17, 2025, the dream was officially pronounced dead. The CPRA and the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group, the body managing the BP settlement funds, formally terminated the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion project. They capped the expenditures at the $618.52 million that had already been dispersed. Over $500 million spent on planning, modeling, legal work, and initial site preparation for a project that would now never be built. A monument to a failed hope, sitting on the edge of a disappearing coast. The largest environmental rescue in American history had been defeated. Not by engineering challenges, not by a lack of money, but by an irreconcilable conflict over what exactly was being saved. With its $3 billion centerpiece gone, Louisiana's coastal master plan had a massive hole in its heart. The state had to pivot, and it had to pivot fast. The result was the fiscal year 2027 annual plan, a $1.54 billion budget unanimously adopted by the state legislature in late April of 2026. Governor Landry hailed it as a moment when coastal restoration rises above politics. It represented a fundamental shift in strategy, a move away from massive, controversial, nature-mimicking diversions, and a hard turn toward a different kind of engineering. The new plan leans heavily on brute force. Instead of letting the river build the land, the state will now pay to have the land built by machines. The focus is now on mechanical dredging and marsh creation. Colossal dredging vessels will be deployed to suck up sand and sediment from the floor of the Gulf of Mexico or from the river itself, pump it through miles of pipeline, and deposit it in targeted areas to literally manufacture new marshland. It's a faster, more direct, and far more controllable process than a river diversion. You can build land precisely where you want it. You don't flood an entire basin with fresh water and hope for the best. It's also far more expensive on a per-acre basis, and it lacks the self-sustaining, long-term power of a true river delta. You are building static land in a dynamic system, land that will immediately begin to erode and sink the moment you stop adding more material. It is a constant, ongoing, phenomenally expensive treadmill. The new plan also funnels money into projects like the river reintroduction into Marepa's swamp, a less contentious diversion designed to restore a swamp ecosystem rather than rebuild a saline marsh. It funds shoreline protection, ridge restoration, and all the other vital but smaller scale projects that were always part of the master plan. But the grand vision is gone. The single, transformational project has been replaced by a distributed, more industrial approach. It creates dredging jobs, it avoids fights with the fishing industry, and it produces tangible, measurable acres of new land that politicians can point to. But is it enough? Can you truly fight a geological force with a fleet of dredges? Can you rebuild a state the size of Delaware one bucket of sand at a time? Many scientists are deeply skeptical. They see the pivot away from sediment diversions as a catastrophic mistake, a capitulation to short-term economic interests at the expense of long-term ecological survival. To them, dredging is a band-aid, a very expensive, very temporary band-aid on a gaping wound. Diversions were the only tool that had the potential to be a cure because they addressed the root cause of the problem, the disconnection of the river from its delta. Without that, you are just fighting a holding action against the inevitable. This grim reality is voiced most powerfully by experts like Torbjørn Trinkvist, a geology professor at Tulane University and a leading authority on coastal subsidence. His research into the combined effects of sinking land and rising seas has led him to a devastating conclusion. For much of the coast, it's already too late. We have exceeded the threshold from which there is basically no real way back anymore, he has stated. And there probably won't be a way back for a couple of thousand years. He argues that the rates of relative sea level rise in some parts of Louisiana are so extreme that no amount of restoration, whether by dredging or diversion, can keep pace. The physics of the problem have simply become insurmountable. The land is sinking, and the sea is rising faster than we can possibly build. You can see this future arriving in real time. On a narrow ridge of land in Terrebonne Parish sits what's left of Isle de Jean Charles. It was once home to a vibrant community of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe, surrounded by miles of protective marsh. Today, over 98% of that original landmass is gone. The island has been reduced to a fragile sliver, constantly inundated by tides. Hurricanes have shattered the community. In response, the federal government funded the very first major, publicly funded climate resettlement program in American history, moving the remaining residents to safer ground inland. They are, in effect, America's first domestic climate refugees. They are a preview of what comes next. Further east, in Lafourche Parish, the town of Levees offers another glimpse. A century ago, it was a thriving fishing village. Today, up to 80% of its landmass has washed away. Houses that were once blocks from the water now stand on stilts in the middle of open bays. The main highway is elevated on a massive concrete bridge, soaring over a ghost landscape of submerged streets and vanished properties. Leeville wasn't evacuated. It just dissolved. The ultimate tragedy is that we know exactly how to build land. Nature has left us two perfect working models. The Atchafalaya and Wax Lake deltas are the only two places on the entire Louisiana coast where land is not disappearing. It's actively growing. These deltas are being built by a portion of the Mississippi River's flow that escapes the main leveed channel. They are proof that the process still works. They are vibrant, expanding, healthy ecosystems. They are a living demonstration of what the rest of the Louisiana coast could have been, and what the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion was designed to replicate. They are a monument to a cure we chose not to use. So Louisiana finds itself in an impossible position in the summer of 2026. A state facing erasure. The rate of land loss, once as high as a football field every 34 minutes, has slowed to 1 every 100 minutes. A victory born of past restoration efforts and a temporary lull in major hurricane strikes. But that number is a fragile average. It masks the terrifying acceleration that happens when a major storm makes landfall. It obscures the grim forecasts from scientists like Trinkvist, who believe the tipping point has been passed. And it ignores the fact that the state's most powerful tool for a long-term solution was just dismantled for political and economic reasons. They are spending over $1.5 billion next year. The dredging machines will roar to life. The pipelines will be laid. New land will appear. But out in the Gulf, the water keeps rising, and beneath the new, manufactured marshes, the old delta keeps sinking. 9 millimeters a year. A constant, silent pressure that never stops. The engineers have a new plan. The politicians have declared unity. But the fundamental equation has not changed. You cannot fight geological time with a budget cycle. And in the war between Louisiana and the ocean has never lost. The state is still vanishing. The money is just a way to manage the pace of its disappearance.